brother, Susan's brother-in-law. And my brother Ken gave me a long list of things not to do or say tonight. No comedy. Susan hated schlocky comedy. And I'd come out as a hack. I am not to yell, "Hello, Chicago." I'm not in REO Speedwagon. No swearing. My brother felt compelled to tell me I should not get up here and swear at a memorial service. You know, Susan loved to laugh, and Ken had her laughing for well over 30 years. And I loved her, and Susan, this is for you, from all of us. When you're down and in trouble and you need a helping hand, nothing's going right. Close your eyes and think of me. Soon I will be there, brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name. You know wherever I am, I'll come running, see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got a friend. If the sky above you should grow dark and full of clouds, and that old north wind should begin to blow, keep your head together, call my name out low. Soon you'll hear me knocking upon your door. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got a friend. Now ain't it good to know you've got a friend, when people can be so cold, they'll hurt you and desert you, they'll take your soul if you let them. Don't you let them. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there, yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got a friend.
Welcome. My name is Barbara Robertson. I'm going to be your MC tonight as we celebrate Susan Marie Miller. Now and then, a performance will define a moment in the theater for me, a moment in my life. I will never see a production of Cabaret without thinking of Susan playing Fraulein Schneider. I walk through the produce department, if they have pineapples on display, I think of Susan. Whenever I cut up fresh pineapple, I think, if you rub me diamond, if you rub me pearl. I didn't really grow up going to the theater or seeing plays. I don't know quite how I ended up in the theater department at the University of Illinois, but I was barely unpacked from my dorm room my freshman year, and I began rehearsals for the Cranard Center production of Cabaret. And Susan was playing Fraulein Schneider. I got to watch her rehearse. I got to watch her play from the wings. I got to watch her on stage. I was a hiccuping party guest in the upstage part of a scene that she was playing. She was magical. She was funny and playful and witty and soulful. So honestly connected emotionally. I'd get chills watching her. I cried, I laughed. She was my teacher. I got to see my teacher perform. Okay, she was a teacher for a lot of us here, all right, everybody?
Those boats don't float.
Anyone remember Aqua, a lovely bunch of coconuts? Yeah, I cannot hear these phrases. I cannot even think of them without thinking of Susan and how she nurtured us. I didn't even know what blocking meant when I started at the University of Illinois. And having her for an acting teacher, well, speaks volumes. Boys class, acting class. For decades, I've been requiring my students at Columbia College to do an outrageous monologue. Anybody got their outrageous monologue still? I use mine a lot, and it's helped me. So now my students have to do an outrageous monologue because Susan made me do an outrageous monologue. And then she was my advisor. Even in the old days, it was hard to graduate college early. But with Susan as my advisor, I was able to graduate in less than 4 years. When Susan and Ken moved to Chicago, she became my friend. Someone I respected, someone I could trust to talk to me honestly and lovingly about my work as an actress. That's gold. I never ever felt that she was anything but supportive of my work and the challenges of being an actor and being a teacher. I will miss her very much. She really is irreplaceable. She has given me so much that I will never be short in feeling her influence in my life. To borrow from Mr. Gershwin, we've got something permanent, I mean in the way we care. Our love is here to stay. I'm so grateful. Thank you, Susan. Thank you so very much. Tonight, our hope is that each of us will learn something about Susan that we didn't know. For example, how many of you knew that Susan was working as an administrative assistant at CBS News in New York when President Kennedy was assassinated? She labored all night gathering archival footage. She watched Andy Rooney and Don Hewitt, among other senior news personnel, get quietly soused. Or did you know that Susan was nearly fired from an equity apprenticeship at the Allenbury Playhouse in Pennsylvania because she destroyed a collection of antique blouses by soaking them in bleach? Or that she and her parents attended the inaugural season of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Canada. She was so excited about meeting Alec Guinness that she went into convulsions. Susan was born in Meadville, Pennsylvania. For father was in the Marines, so they moved around a lot. She often blamed the rapid succession of grade schools for her shortcomings in math, geography, and penmanship. Her first stage appearance was in the 6th grade when she portrayed the sheriff in the school play, and she wore a mustache. But with or without the whiskers, she had found her calling. The family finally settled into the Binghamton, New York area where Susan's father, Don, started working for IBM. Susan's mother, Helen Dorworth Murray, oversaw their modest home on Robbins Street in Enfield. Around this time, Susan fell madly in love with Laurence Olivier. She and her neighborhood friend, Dickie Balsley, wrote an elaborate letter to Olivier and Vivian Leigh, where each letter of the stars' names was followed by a superlative. O for Oscar-worthy, L live, and so on. Olivier's handwritten response was a prized possession for many years. Susan was involved in IBM's Children's Theater and organized play readings with her girlfriends at home. Their scripts mostly came from the library or from the latest issue of Theater World magazine. After high school, Susan attended Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Her best friend there was Charlie Perkins. Charlie couldn't be here tonight, but Kathy Scambiatera is going to read a letter. Kathy.
Although Susan Murray was a year older than I, she was my best friend at Dickinson College. We shared many things, including a love of drama and our religion, which was Christian Science. Because of Susan, I joined Phi Mu fraternity at college and asked Susan to be my big sister. This was a very special relationship for both of us, but we were often not so serious and we laughed about everything. Together we ran the Christian Science Society at Dickinson, and often we were the only attendees at the service in the little chapel in Denny Hall. We performed in many plays together, but it was Susan who was always the star. After college, we kept in touch through our interest in theater, and I was thrilled when Susan married her dear student, Ken. I had the chance to meet him in New York City for lunch. I have never seen Susan so radiant and relaxed as she was that day with Ken. I knew Susan's parents, and she knew mine, and that was important for both of us, as we were only children. That was another bond. When my first child, Pamela, was born, I asked Susan to be her godmother because I wanted my daughter to know Susan. However, as the years progressed, I did not see Susan, but only heard from her occasionally, and having left the church, I felt a bit removed from her. Now I regret not having kept closer ties with her. She was a blithe spirit and a wonderful actor, but most of all,
After Dickinson, Susan was accepted at the Yale School of Drama, where her classmates included Austin Pendleton, Charles Kimbrough, and the playwright Oliver Haley. Her teachers included Miss Connie Welsh and Nikos Sakarakoulis. Although she was invited back to the program after the first year, Susan worried about finances and elected to move with the Yale production of John Brown's Body for its off-Broadway run. In New York, the introduction of the play was performed each night by a different celebrity. The mayor of New York, or Vincent Price. On one occasion, Basil Rathbone, Sherlock Holmes himself, pitched in. After the show, he told the cast that they were very talented. Though Susan quoted him verbatim to her parents, Mom and Dad, unfortunately, told everyone Basil Rathbone thought Susan was the most talented young actress they had ever seen. Our parents. Susan continued living in New York for the next few years. She auditioned, performed in plays, hung out with her friends, Oliver Haley and his wife Betsy, and Susan's cousin Anne, who's here with us tonight. Anne? Susan tried comedy, stand-up comedy at a club in the Village. She took classes at HB Studio, ushered, had her heart broken, worked odd jobs. In short, she lived the actor's life. The search for work led her to Wisconsin and Beloit's Court Theatre, which was a popular equity theater with production staged in the round. Each play ran for a week, with the next week's play rehearsing during the day. One of her compatriots there was Sharon Phillips. A lot of us know Sharon from her time at Body Politic. Currently, she's a director and an actor at Bible Story Theater at St. Paul's Church.
Known and adored Susan Murray since I was 20 years old, just a few years ago. Actually, it was the summer of 1963, Beloit, Wisconsin, and I and a handful of other undergraduates, including Barbara Barron, sitting right over there, had been asked to participate as for the Summer Court Theater as members of the resident company. I was thinking, were we called interns or slugs or whatever? But no, I pulled out this old flyer and we are listed as members of the resident company, which means that we do whatever anybody asks us to do, and if we prayed a lot, we actually got a part. But as we did 9 plays in 10 weeks, and we did plays with more than the off-loop 5-character people, we started off that summer with Turgenev's A Month in the Country, a little nice Russian thing to start the summer. Then we did a little English comedy, then The Girl on the Via Flaminia, I'm sure that's everybody's favorite. We did an adaptation of Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. We did Pirandello's, Right You Are. We did, well, we ended up the summer with Misalliance by Shaw. So it's, your light summer fare. Which was really something. Well, I was thrilled to death. I would have done anything, and I did. I was prop master, Barbara was in the box office. We acted as often as we could, and Susan was the leading lady. Now, at the beginning of the summer, this flyer would be sent out, and here's Susan right over here. She was the ingenue for the summer. And one of our guest actresses who came every now and then was the great Anne Shropshire, and all these other wonderful people. Anyway, I was just enamored of Susan, and she became a dear, dear friend. And I was going to spend a lot of time today writing something, but what I ended up doing was reading plays that we had been into. And in every one of these, I hear her voice so clearly. As Barbara said by defining the role in Cabaret, Susan, for me, defined each of the characters that she played. And as I open each of these scripts, I can hear her voice delineating the character that she played. I guess the funnest memory that I have with Susan was when we did a play called Uncle Harry, Thomas Job or Job. It was a mystery drama, and we played spinster sisters, Hester and Letty. And our brother, Uncle Harry, wanted to murder us. But he mistakenly murdered Susan, and I ended up going to jail for it. But it was the most popular play of the summer. But the lines were so ridiculous. And we'd be rehearsing, and we only had the week to rehearse. We'd open a play Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, we'd get the new script, do the read-through, perform, block, perform, block, perform. Sunday, we'd switch the sets, and Monday we'd do run through Act 1, run through Act 2, Monday night dress rehearsal, Tuesday brush-ups, Tuesday night open, Wednesday morning the new script. So anyway, you just did what you had to do. Chose from character A to C for one role, and that sort of thing. Well, Hester and Letty just got to us. First of all, Court Theater was not air conditioned. It was on a stone floor in the Art Center at Beloit College. It seated 210 people. And we were very close quarters. I mean, very close quarters. We're acting here, and there was one fellow that always sat in the front row with the script in his lap and followed it. That's being going. Other people would put their feet on the stage. Just too many stories to tell. Too many stories to tell. But anyway, we'd be rehearsing as Hester and Letty, and we'd get so tickled because the lines were, "Oh, you devil! Oh, how could you do that?" I mean, it was just histrionic. And I worried so that I would crack up during the performance, and you just wouldn't, because people were sitting right there and you could see. So I would avoid looking in her eyes because they would twinkle, but she never lost it. In the progressive years, I did 6 seasons at Court Theater, and during that time I met and married Jack Phillips, who was sitting here, and we did a lot of shows with Susan. She became part of our extended family. And along about in the 70s, our mentor, Kirk Denmark, talked her into joining the faculty at Beloit College. And so Jack and I drove up, it was 68, I think, drove up to see her production of The Borscht Boy, and which was a fine production, really marvelous. It was the first time we had seen her directing. It was strong, it was definite. As we drove back to Chicago, and I was fairly newly pregnant at the time. In fact, I keep running over to the Dramatists where Barbara was working as a cashier on Roosevelt Road. They sold the best potato salad. I didn't do watermelon, I did potato salad during the pregnancy. So anyway, as we're driving home, we're talking about, I don't know, we're just talking about Brendan being and about the Irish and Brendan name sort of resonated. Brendan. Sure enough, there's Brendan, who we named after seeing The Borscht Boy and after all of your marvelous potato salad. In the successive years since Susan and I had both been in Chicago, we would get together to have lunch at least once a year. I don't know how people can get so busy, but it always felt as if the years just fell away, and we were back there on the Beloit campus with her as the young ingenue and me as the acolyte. And I wanted to leave you with a quote from one of these millions of plays, but instead, as I was talking to Ken this week, the one word that kept coming to my mind was Susan's innate kindness and gentleness. So the quote that I leave you with is from Galatians 5, verse 22, because this to me epitomizes who Susan is, that she is the fruit of the Spirit with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And my life is enriched.
Well, after several summer seasons in Wisconsin and winters in New York City, Susan decided to pursue an advanced degree at Purdue University, where they also had an equity theater under the direction of Joe Stockdale. Susan was cast many times, Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest, Captain in Long Day's Journey into Night with Anne Revere, who won the Academy Award for National Velvet, Miss Tarleton in Miss Alliance, with Eric Berry, the British film and stage actor who originated the role of Charles in Pippin. With a graduate degree in hand, Susan was coaxed into coming back to Beloit, this time to teach during the winters and perform during the summer. Among her students at Beloit were Jameson Parker, Simon and Simon fame, the versatile stage and film actress Amy Wright, Deer Hunter, Tally's Folly. In 1971, Susan joined the theater department at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. To quote Susan, she was hired because someone on the faculty had quit suddenly over the summer and they didn't have a choice. Aren't we all so lucky? She taught acting, voice, dialects at Illinois for 14 glorious years. She also directed and acted while there. In '71, the department was perhaps best known for the theater history curriculum with Dr. Barnard Hewitt heading the department. But despite this academic slant, an amazing collection of students went there, and Susan taught them. Robert Falls, artistic director at the Goodman. Andrea Evans, Tina on Days of Our Lives. Peter Crombie, best known as Crazy Joe Davola on Seinfeld. Film director, Ang Lee. So many of us here, including our next speaker, Mr. Tom Eula. Tom is currently full-time faculty at Columbia College, award-winning playwright, novelist, actor, director. He played Scrooge for 7 seasons, over 400 performances at the Goodman's production of A Christmas Carol.
When I got here, Ken pulled me aside and asked me to keep it clean. So, I have 2 student Miller stories. When I guest directed Susan as the grandmother in Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour at Cranard, I had a sound cue I was very proud of. It was sassy, it was sardonic, it was very, very hip. After the bad seed little girl throws down the nice little girl onto the ground and threatens to kill her, I had the sound guy play Doris Day's version, Teacher's Pet. Oh, we want to be teacher's pet. Susan felt that that sound cue undercut her next scene. She explained this to me very calmly and quietly as she twisted my arm behind me in a very effective and painful arm lock. Of course, I saw her point. Susan would have had a great career as a professional wrestler. I think I still have rotator cuff damage. My other favorite Susan Miller story took place during an evening with Ken Miller. Ken Miller's one-man show that I co-directed with Steve Gretzky. The final sketch was Ken's stirring musical rendition of the Kennedy assassination. During Jackie Kennedy's lyric, I'm going to wash that man right out of my dress, I peeked between the curtains to see Susan's reaction. She had 2 faces. And there are many ways you can measure a life. I think one of the most meaningful is how many lives did this person touch? How many people did this person help in some way? I thought about that this year as I taught my students things that Susan taught to me. And I'm confident that in another 10 or 20 years, my students will be teaching their students things that I learned from Susan. I think teachers live forever. Unfortunately, I cannot pass on to my students Susan's wonderful laugh. Susan, on behalf of my students, on behalf of my students, and on behalf of me, thank you.
During Susan's tenure at U of I, the theater department underwent a seismic shift. Barney Hewitt stepped down, and Susan pushed for a conservatory approach to training actors. David Knight was head of that professional acting program from 1976 until his retirement in 1997. All the way from Colorado, David is here with his longtime collaborator, fellow professor and wife, Wendy McClure Knight. U of I's first couple of the theater.
It's very difficult to follow all these wonderful things with something really meaningful, but I have very strong feelings about Susan. When I came to the University of Illinois, I had a long career in the theater, but it was in London. And I think I was a bit of an alien presence to many people there. I was asked, as you said, to start a program in professional acting. And we had a daunting task because we were really starting a BFA and an MFA program. I had a lot to do. Susan was the first and the best person. She welcomed me with open arms. And I know she had a lot of experience in professional work herself. So, you know, for her to do that with me, coming as a stranger to this department, was really quite impressive. I was impressed by her knowledge, by her skill, her intelligence, but most of all, I think, I was impressed by her outgoing personality. She was so full of life, so helpful, so positive. To me and to her students, of course. All of her students knew that if they needed a friend, if they needed advice, they could go to Susan. And that was an example to me. Helped me see what a wonderful place this could be. So I was very impressed with her. Later on, after a few years, my wife joined the faculty. And there again, I know that some of the people at the university theater department used to say, "Here come the knights, watch out." But Susan did not do that. She was not like that at all. She welcomed Wendy, became a great friend. And of course, we did a great deal of work together. Then, eventually, she married this young man here. And when she did, she invited me, my wife, and our children to the wedding. And that was a very, very joyful affair. Just gorgeous. We were so happy for both of them, and we had a lovely time at the wedding. The only sad thing for me was that it wasn't long afterwards that she retired from the theater department and went, I think, here to Chicago with her husband. And I was very sad to see her go. She was extremely difficult to replace. And so, of course, that posed a problem. But we remained friends over the years. We kept in touch, and we miss her very, very much. I think that's the end of my remarks, except to say, isn't it wonderful that there are so many people here tonight to join in what I consider to be a lovely celebration. Thank you.
Yes, how lovely that we are all here. On New Year's Eve, 1977, Susan married Kenneth Leroy Miller, Jr. Kenneth. The wedding was held at the Christian Science Student Organization building in Champaign, Illinois, with a small group of family and friends, including David and Wendy. As an only child, Susan had to adjust to the rigors of the sprawling Miller clan. To add to the confusion, Ken's mother's maiden name was also Miller. So it was all Millers all the time. Early in their marriage, they visited Ken's home in Dixon, Illinois, while Susan and Ken's mom chatted in the kitchen. The Miller boys were playing King of the Raft in the swimming pool. Susan looked out to see her new husband being held underwater and turning blue. She was about to call 911, and Ken's mother said, "Oh, isn't it wonderful to see the boys playing together again?" Now, Chuck Miller, one of Ken's brothers and co-conspirator in the attempted drowning. Chuck?
Oh, thank you for that fabricated intro. I'm going to thank Ken for giving me the honor and the privilege to speak on behalf of our family. 35 years ago, we got a phone call from Ken announcing he was getting married. This really came as a bit of a shock because we didn't realize he was even dating anyone. A plan was hatched to meet Susan at our family home in Dixon. Although Susan had done several hundred auditions, I can imagine this was one of her most nerve-wracking. I I remember Susan walking in the front door and exchanging a huge hug with our mother. Within 3 seconds, Susan was part of the family. Our most cherished memories of Susan was her ability to find joy in the most simplistic of things. Susan would take a bite of warm apple pie, tilt her head back, and just say, "Absolutely marvelous, isn't it?" Over the last 35 years, Susan has shared many of our lifetime moments. The passing of both our parents, Christmas days, weddings, holding both our children as babies, and all the trials and tribulations that all families endure. All with class, all with kindness, all with love. My daughter Ruby and I went to visit Susan on one of the last days in the hospital. Upon seeing my daughter, Susan greeted her with an excited, that slightly higher pitched voice. "Ruby, my goodness, how are you?" That was classic Susan. At her best, even at her worst. We lost a caring sister-in-law, a loving aunt, and a great friend. But we will never lose her spirit of joy and gratitude. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Chuck. 1985, Susan and Ken decided to leave U of I. Ken had an opportunity to work at IBM in Chicago, and Susan was looking forward to new adventures. She guest taught at Beloit College again, Illinois State, Columbia College, Roosevelt University, Principia College. She served as a speech and dialect coach for a number of companies in Chicago, 8 seasons at Seanachi, as well as productions with Timeline, Chicago Dramatists, Court Theatre in Chicago, Theater of Western Springs, and Lifeline. Regionally, Susan worked as a dialect coach for Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and she acted at Milwaukee Rep and the Reilly Theatre in Baton Rouge. In the last few years, Susan focused on service to her community. Most of her time was spent working on behalf of her church and as a member of the deaf committee. Ron Herson and his wife Sarah were Susan's neighbors in Urbana when Ron was doing his graduate studies at the theater there. Reconnecting in Chicago, Ron recruited Susan to the deaf committee. Help me now welcome Ron Herson.
Hi, I'm Ron Herson. I first met Susan Murray in 1972. Take off your shoes and socks and count, that's 40 years. And I met her when I went to Champaign for the first time to be a graduate student in the theater department at the University of Illinois. And one of my first assignments there was to be an assistant stage manager of Mary Arben's production of Cabaret. So the first time I went to a rehearsal, I walked into the rehearsal room at the Kranick Center, and there was Susan in a muslin rehearsal skirt, rehearsing the role of Fräulein Schneider, which she played opposite Mike Bergson as Herr Schultz, 2 professional actors working in an otherwise student production of the play. They were a charming couple on stage. They were delightful when he brought a pineapple for her, as Barbara pointed out, and that was truly a great number and a delight in that show. The following year, Sarah and I moved into an apartment on Green Street in Urbana, and literally the morning after we moved in, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing some work at my typewriter when there was a knock at the door, and I opened the door, and there was Susan standing. She had heard me clacking away on the old Smith Corona through the paper-thin walls of the apartment and came over to introduce herself to her new neighbor. And there we were neighbors for 2 years. And we really enjoyed each other's company. She would come over to our place, we would go to hers. If she needed some help, we'd try to help her out. If we needed help, she'd help us. We had car trouble, and she gave us a ride somewhere, I don't remember where. And after that, had you asked me, I would have advised you not to get in the car. If you did, you would would probably still, like me, have white knuckles. I was never Susan's student, but it was obvious that all of Susan's students loved her. They followed her wherever she went. They fluttered around her like moths at a candle flame. And they came to visit her at her apartment, and we would hear their voices and their laughter through the thin green street walls. One student visited her again and again, kept coming back. And it turned out that this was not a student visitor at all, but a gentleman called. When we learned that Susan and Ken were to get married, we were surprised. I think a lot of people thought, oh my, they're such an unlikely couple. A wacky undergraduate and a very proper school teacher. Walter Denton was marrying Constance Brooks. But Susan and Ken proved all that wrong. They were an adorable, a natural match with one another. From the first occasion when we spent time with them as a couple, it was clear that they were perfect for each other. They were good for each other and good to each other. He was kind to her, and she laughed at his jokes. Who else would do that? After I left Champaign, I eventually made my way back to Chicago and was invited to join the Jeff Committee. And after a couple of years of service on the Jeff Committee, I thought, this committee needs more people who know what they're looking at when they go to the theater. This committee needs people who know something about the theater and who have a keen eye for what they're seeing when they go to a performance. So I asked myself, who do I know who is a really astute observer of the theater? And the first person I thought of was Susan. But I lost track of Susan and Ken and wasn't quite sure where to find them until I went to a Sunday matinee at a certain storefront theater on Devon Avenue. And there was a poster in the lobby announcing the actor training classes that the theater was going to be offering, and one of the classes was Voice for the Stage, to be taught by Susan Murray Miller. And so through the box office, I was able to contact Susan, and I recruited her to join the Jeff Committee, which turned out to be a great thing for me, because I got to see Susan regularly at meetings of the Jeff Committee, and very often at the theater, and sometimes even Ken would come there. I also had a chance when I took my sons with me to the theater to introduce them to Susan, and they got to know her. And in fact, I was speaking to my son in LA just this afternoon, and when I told him where I was coming this evening, he said, now there was a sweet lady. I lasted on the Jeff Committee for a little more than 10 years, and when I left, I would open the paper and I'd say, oh, thank God, I don't have to go see that. Another non-equity Titus Andronicus. But Susan stayed and went to all those productions, and she was really an asset to the committee. She was very diligent. She was very conscientious, as she was about everything. She wanted to go and see every show. She wanted to do everything just right. And she did. And seeing all those productions was nearly impossible for the Jeff Committee member to do. But she did, and she continued her service on the Jeff Committee right up until her performance and her death. And I'm sure she will not be easily replaced. My most important memory of Susan, though, and of Ken, was an occasion when I was at the O'Neill Center in Connecticut, working on a play of mine that was in development there. The O'Neill is great. It's like summer camp for playwrights. And I was there for a month working on my play, and at the end of the month, there were public readings of the play. And the evening of the first public reading, I was walking to the theater, and as I approached the theater, I looked up, and who was standing there but Susan and Ken. They had taken a road trip east to visit some of the shrines of students, of Susan's childhood and youth, and made a special side trip to Waterford, Connecticut, not on anybody's beaten path, just to come and hear a reading of my play. And I was really touched to see them there, and truly grateful. It was a true act of loyalty and friendship, and I really appreciated it. I remember vividly after the reading, we sat together in Blue Jean's pub, the only and talked about the play, and they were so generous and so kind in their comments about the play, and it meant a great deal to me. I'm sure I thanked them at the time, but probably, especially in retrospect, inadequately so. And so, Ken, I'd like to thank you again for coming, and I wish Susan were here. I'd like to thank her. But Susan was gone. But when you talk, when you speak, when you use your voice, when you feel the wine buzz resonating in your skull, that will be Susan. And you will remember what she taught and all that you learned, and you will remember her warmth and her friendship. And I'm sure that flights of angels have sung her to the rest, and may Susan Murray indeed rest in peace. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Next, we'd like to invite Dan Novak to the podium. Dan is the manager of the Lyric Opera Bryan Center, a great family friend, and a fellow member of the Second Church of Christ Scientist in Chicago. Dan?
Ken asked me to speak tonight to you all as a friend of Susan's and also as a member of her church family. For many years, Susan was a devoted member of the Second Church of Christ Scientist Chicago. That's the formal name of the Christian Science Church, which is just a few blocks away from Susan and Ken's home in Lincoln Park. She was a dear friend to all of us at the church, and she was very actively involved by serving in a number of different roles. Of course, that word, roles, is very appropriate for Susan. Her life in the theater was a special part of our friendship. My partner and I see a lot of theater here in Chicago, then we make an annual sojourn to Stratford, Ontario. And on many a Sunday, Susan and I would swap recommendations and reviews, and every now and then, I'd get a great story of a production she had seen that was especially memorable. Over the last several years, I've known of Susan's involvement with the Jeff Committee. It certainly kept her very busy, and she very dutifully fulfilled the responsibilities of that post. Likewise, as a church member, Susan performed her duties with a great sense of responsibility and commitment, and her background as a performer also had an influence. Our church services are led by two members who are elected as the readers. One reads selections from the King James Version of the Bible, and the other reads excerpts from the Christian Science textbook written by the woman who founded the religion, Mary Baker Eddy. For several years, Susan served as the Bible reader for our services. Her familiarity with period-style English, as well as her skills at telling stories, made her ideally suited to this position. All of us very much enjoyed hearing her read. A true performer, Susan always insisted that she and the other reader rehearse at the church. And she would usually wear the shoes for the rehearsal that she would later wear at the actual service. She was always very well prepared. At the same time, she also wanted to be sure that those listening could focus on the text they were hearing, and did all she could to not distract their attention. Having on hand a stark, snowy white tissue for an unexpected runny nose would simply not do. It had to be almond-colored so as to better blend with her skin color, and Ken would frequently be sent on a quest to find this most ideal colored tissue so that she could fulfill her duty as reader to the very best degree possible. Susan served in a number of other capacities: board member, reading room librarian, both here in Lincoln Park and in the reading room that used to be downtown, sponsored by all Chicago area churches, and on several committees. Ken would often join Susan to help with our spring and fall landscaping cleanup days, and the two of them provided very kind assistance to a church member who relocated when not able to live in her home. Some of you here today may not have known that Susan was a Christian Scientist. Our religion teaches that all of us are the sons and daughters of God, the spiritual images of the divine. Our spiritual identity is what is truly real and eternal. It is without beginning and without end. The many qualities of Susan's spiritual identity, intelligence, good humor, dedication, love, are still with us and go on for eternity. And her understanding of this helped her to face this transition in her experience fearlessly. She was at peace, and she is at peace, and that's something for which to be grateful and to celebrate. I'd like to close with a quote from one of Mary Baker Eddy's other writings, an address for a gathering of the church's entire membership in Boston in 1902. The curtain of human life should be lifted on reality, on that which outweighs time, on duty done and life perfected, wherein joy is real and faithless. Who of the world's lovers ever found her true? It is wise to be willing to wait on God and to be wiser than serpents, to hate no man, to love one's enemies, and to square accounts with each passing hour. Then thy gain outlives the sun, for the sun shines but to show man the beauty of holiness and the wealth of love.
Thank you, Tom. Some people couldn't be here tonight, but really wanted to be a part of the celebration, so we've asked a few former students to read their words. Don Reilly, Marcia Cook-Weiss, and Tom Euler.
Peter Crazy Joe DeBola Crombie writes, Susan Murray Miller was my first and most inspiring acting teacher. Her period styles class opened up the wonderful world of classical theater for me. Her critical eye and kind heart gave me the confidence to go forward in a difficult business. I will always remember her and be grateful to her for her teachings.
Alan Ruck, best known for playing Cameron Fry in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, writes, I first met Susan in April of 1974. My dad and I left right after school on Friday, and he drove all night so I could be at my audition for the theater department at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. I was going to do a monologue from 1,000 Clowns, but had decided at the last minute it was stupid. So I memorized Trinculo's strange bedfellow speech and stole everything my best friend had done when he had performed the role a year or so before. The audition was in the drama rehearsal room at Cranard. The auditors were Susan, Peter Franklin White, and Ray Kraft. My work that day was, in a word, broad. My sense was that Peter was wildly unimpressed at pretty much everything I did. I think Ray sort of felt sorry for me, probably because I looked like a fetus. But Susan offered some helpful advice. She pulled me aside at the end of the session and said, I might want to think about working on some different pieces. She thought I should look for something that showed some fire, as she put it. She suggested Jimmy Porter from Look Back in Anger, which was very generous of her, as I was 17 and weighed 135 pounds and had a mouthful of braces. But she took the time to help a young person on their journey. From that first meeting, from the very beginning, Susan made it her business to be a mentor, a teacher, a guide, and a friend.
Donna Spann, former Jeff Committee member. Susan meant a lot to me. We had such wonderful talks together. She was always fun, insightful, and supportive of the other. She would light up a room when she entered, and then life would flow abundantly and rich. I liked the way she told the truth, never cynical, just wanting to get to the heart of things. Indeed, she was a pistol, and one of the kindest ones I have ever known. there is a deep hole in my heart.
Jeffrey Ortman, an arts consultant. Susan was the best teacher I had at U of I. I was never an early riser. Susan's 9 a.m. classes were the only 9 a.m. classes I attended. Why? Because I learned something there. Susan never once said, "Don't do that." She always encouraged us to find our own way, to make our own choices. Clearly, Susan had an impact on many people's lives. Mine was one of them.
Edie Allison Shapiro, actress, singer living in LA. What an accomplished, endearing, generous, funny, warm woman Susan was. And I am grateful for the pieces of her spirit and artistry that live in me and all the people she taught.
Michael Halberstam, artistic director of the Writers Theatre. Susan Miller helped lay a foundation of technique in her acting classes at the University of Illinois, with a plethora of practical exercises that I still call upon today, both as an actor and as a director. She will forever be a part of my artistic endeavors. Susan is not gone. Like all great theatrical practitioners, she has become a permanent part of the art form.
Jack Hickey, actor and artistic director of Oak Park Festival Theatre. There is a speech of Ophelia's in the Lesac book, and Susan assigned it to me. After I performed it, she informed me that I didn't have to do it as Ophelia.
Karen Targent, actor. I worked with Susan on many Seanachi projects, and she was such a dear and beautiful woman. We got along so well. I always appreciated her clear insight and warm presence. Natalie Cunningham, actor. Susan was my acting teacher at the U of I in 1981 and 1982. She was tough, demanding, and wonderful. And I fully believe she's the reason I've been able to have a career as an actor as long as I have. I have also had the pleasure of working with her on stage as her daughter in Brighton Beach Memoirs. Carolyn Kennedy Bruckner, former student, currently teaching. Susan's knowledge and patience and enthusiasm for the theater always distinguished her. Please know that her legacy lives within all of her students, especially many of us who carry her joy into our own classrooms.
Stephen Tobolowsky, Tobe, best known as an actor in the insurance salesman in Groundhog Day. In 1975, the U of I started a master's program in acting. The program, the first year, was a thing of shreds and patches. Everyone was scurrying around trying to put the classes together while they were teaching them. The acting classes were taught by Mary Arbenz and Susan. Now that was a pair. Mary taught an acting method that predated Stanislavski by a few decades. And told us stories about her acting career at the turn of the century. The real burden was carried by Susan. Susan taught acting with a language that we all understood. She had the boundless energy of youth combined with real-world teaching and performing experience. She had one goal: to make us better. She would do it in any way she could. She was honest, insightful, inventive, and most importantly for me, for all of us in the new program, she was kind. She understood how crazy everything was that first year. So many things were changing. She never let it be a distraction or a burden to her. She went about her work, not so much as a teacher, but as an artist. She was always open to new experience. 3 weeks ago, my wife found my journal from Urbana that first year. I didn't even remember that I had it. I was thumbing through the pages and found an entry that is an appropriate tribute to Susan. It reads, "The scene never seemed to work. Couldn't find the handle. Susan gave it to me today. She gave me the key." Susan was good at finding keys. And if that didn't work, she would knock down the door. The only real thanks wonderful teachers get is when their students continue to love the craft they were taught. Susan was a wonderful teacher, a wonderful spirit, a spirit of passion, intelligence, and good humor. She always made acting fun and more. She made it noble.
Andy Probst, a theater writer and critic for The Village Voice and Theater Mania. Let me start by saying how sad I am that I'm not there this evening. Professional obligations are keeping me in New York, and I guess on some level Susan would understand. After all, she was the one who introduced me to theater when I was 7, and I've been hooked ever since. I have countless memories of Susan that are related to the theater. From the first show she took me to, Comedy of Errors at Cranard, to some of the shows I saw her perform in, Arsenic and Old Lace up in Beloit, where we scarfed down Dixie Cream Donuts the morning after the performance, and most notably, her grand over-the-top turn in Hay Fever. I still have a picture of her in that red dressing gown with feathers, signing an autograph for an ardent admirer, me. But the memories that mean the most to me are the ones that are filled with her laughter, when she was just hanging around the family and being, what I've come to realize in adulthood, my very own personal anti-man. Susan was forever opening new windows for me. Sometimes they were just frivolous. The night of the elections in '76, she came up to my room to say goodnight, and as she shut the door, she said in her best Southern drawl, "Now remember, Andy, tomorrow morning, we're all going to have to talk like this." And with a smile, departed. At other times, it was making sure that I saw something that she felt was important. One particularly memorable time came in 1974. I was 9. She told my folks that I had to see Alice doesn't live here anymore. Well, off we went to the movies. Let's just say that there were parts of it that raised more questions for me than I think my parents would have liked. But hey, that was Susan. So too was the way she championed me. Internships at Cranard while I was barely a teen. Always showing up for the plays and musicals I was in, and then talking with me about the work afterwards. I could go on and on and on, but I'll just conclude with, there's not really a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about how lucky I am to have her in my life.
Now we'd just like to welcome all or any of you to share a story or a comment or a blessing that you would have. Because the light is not very good in the house, why don't you come on up stage with me? Anybody? Yeah.
Let me talk from here. My name is John, and I am one of Ken's dozens of cousins. And I never got to see Susan very much. But in thinking about being here, I was just, what is it about Susan? And the thing that just really sticks with me is that anytime you were with Susan, anytime I was with Susan, it was never about her. It was always about you. And if, like me, you're an actor or a performer, that was especially nice because, after all, it is all about you. And so I just really find it to be so wonderful to be among a group of people who are as committed as this group is, to have an evening which, in fact, is all about Susan. Thank you. It's just great to be here with you.
I like my, oh my gosh, the old man's treatment. AKA the time over treatment. I didn't know if I could speak tonight or not, but I am so moved by all of you. And then I saw Bernie Works there, and I said, oh my God, Bernie Works can get here. Certainly stand up. But it's not very well prepared. First, I want to thank Barbara Robertson, Colleen Dodson, Dale Calandra, Trish Elliott, who have just done a tremendous amount of work to prepare for this. Ron Keaton, I have no idea who he is, but he's a wonderful stage manager. Please hire him for your next production. I don't want to sound kind of like a rambler or Someone wrote me an email, I guess a couple of weeks ago, and said, "Did you ever think about what your life would be like if you hadn't met Susan?" And I thought about it. And I wrote back, you know, if I hadn't met Susan, I think I would have been at the Academy Awards as one of the slower marking ballets. Truth is, Susan saved my life. You know, you have regrets. When we first married, I now regret that I would tell people at parties that Susan's cousin was squeaky frog. And then Susan thought that Charles Manson had a warm smile. Susan brought her Irish heritage. I used to state my belief that the Irish sold their children for whiskey. And a lot bigger regrets. And some regrets, you know, my mom would have said, if you got a gun, I'll supply bullets. And I was really troubled by this. And I was talking to a good friend, an attorney in Los Angeles. And he said, you know, Ken, good times, bad times, they're all good if you get through them together. And I guess that's Susan's word to you. If you're in a relationship, good times, bad times, they'll get through it together. We'll be all right. I loved her. I miss her.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank Brian Petterlin, who's also helping us backstage, and our generous host, Brian Colson, who donated the space of the theater tonight for this. And, of course, a special thank you to Ken, who crafted this evening tonight with so much love. To close, Trish Elliott will read a poem that she wrote for tonight, and then Margie Gibson will sing.
Those clicking heels, that fast-paced walk, her purpose true and bold. Peeling laughter and a smile, never of a mold. Spirited, yet modest, supportive through and through. Talented, our Susan, and upon her faith she drew. She made her mark on all of us by believing and with love. Married her fave student. Was never too above it all to find the passion in her life and in her art. Honoring sweet Susan, it comes straight from the heart.
But you need to think about that before you say it in Shakespeare, you want to be sure you know exactly what you're saying in your own words. Can you not come up with anything? I mean,
if there is such a thing as a bad hair day, you sure have one.
good, perfect, wonderful.
Can't run away from you, dear. I've tried so hard, but I fear you'll always follow me near and far. Just when I think that I'm set, just when I've learned to forget, I close my eyes, dear, and there you are. You keep coming back like a song that keeps saying, remember the sweet used to be that was once you and me. You know it keeps coming back like an old melody. The perfume of roses in May returns to my room in December from out of the past where forgotten things belong. You keep coming back like a song from out of the past where forgotten things belong. You keep coming back like a song.
In the words of Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Beth Henley, Susan was luminescent, a light that encouraged me and other artists with her belief and rapt interest. Every time I saw Susan, she was glowing, luminescent. Susan was luminescent. We love you, Susan. We will miss you. Your wisdom, your support, and most of all, your laughter. Please join us all in the lobby for desserts and sweet conversation. You're welcome to come up here and peruse these beautiful visual memories. And good night. Thank you.